so my behavior changed. And so a colleague said, I've noticed that you aren't telling, your terrible dad jokes anymore. Is everything okay? So I think that for parents, when you start to see a change in your child's behavior, that's not necessarily developmentally kind of consistent. So as your child moves from, from a 10-year-old to a 14-year-old, how they engage with you and with the world is going to change. I'm talking about a pattern of, sort of unexpected behaviors. So isolation, losing interest in, wow, and they can change their interest. I don't mind if they change their interest. If they say, I used to like volleyball, but now I'm playing basketball or something like that, fine, But I don't have any interest anymore. I'm not connected to people. And and maybe they're not taking good care of themselves. Maybe you smell drugs on them or something like that. It's like not to be blind to those behaviors. And by the way, curiosity doesn't have to come across as accusation. It's like, hey, listen, when you came in last night, I smelt cigarette smoke on your clothes. That could be a factual statement. Are you smoking cigarettes, or have you been drinking or anything like that? And it doesn't have to be, I think that you've been drinking and going into a big lecture series. I mean, lectures never worked for me when I was growing up as a kid, and they haven't worked for my own kids. So the other part of it, and we sort of touched upon this a little bit briefly, is uh, you know, I'm seeing more and more young people talking about self-hatred, really kind of, and they'll just say something like, I really hate myself. And I worry very much about this because fortunately, we haven't lost too many kids in our treatment program. We've reduced a lot of potential. We've prevented a lot of potential kids from taking their lives. But for those who've completed this, how they see themselves, how children see themselves, especially young women, is with a sense of self-contempt, perfectionism, self-criticism that doesn't seem to be able to budge. So once you start hearing those self-critical statements, they're not just going through a phase. It's something that, you want to listen to. It's like, what's going on?
And that's what's so hard, especially when it comes to having teenagers. And we know that developmentally, they're just faced with so many different challenges, the academic pressures, the social pressures, they're comparing themselves, and then there's social media. There's so many things. And it's interesting hearing about the self-hatred part,
Mhm.
because kids are critical. Oh, I'm
Mhm.
awful,
Mhm.
terrible.
Mhm.
But how can parents really distinguish between something that a kid just says, and that also relates to making
Mhm.
some suicidal comments or comments about hurting
Mhm.
themselves,
Mhm.
how they can differentiate between them just saying it in the heat of the moment versus, oh, this
Mhm.
is a sign that there's something really going on.
Yeah, it's such an important question. So first of all, because that okay, so the two statements. So the first one, that self-hatred one. I'd hear kids talk about self-hatred all the time, independent of their depression or anxiety. It was just like this core sense that there was something fundamentally wrong with who they were. And I'd also hear kids saying, I'm just going to kill myself. Okay, now I take both of those statements extremely seriously. So I always take them seriously. Now, in extremely rare circumstances, do I hospitalize a kid because they've made a suicidal statement. What I then want to know is like, is sit down with that kid, say, like I was really saddened just to hear like, just how much pain you must be in. Like you said you hate yourself. You said that you want to take your life. And it's like, oh, mom, I was just joking. I mean, can you believe it? I got a B and whatever it is, or I forgot something. I just said that. And you say, okay, but on the other hand, they might actually be experiencing that. It's like, is that something that you're really with? They say, yeah, I've had suicide thoughts for a long time, or I've really just felt that I was so much worth so much less than my siblings, worth so much less than the other kids in school. And I just don't feel that I belong in the world, or that the world would be better off without me, you know. So it's having an honest discussion. Now let me just say one other thing about this, because from the parent sort of side, I mean, you know, probably most of the people who are on this call are parents. To have to hear your child suffering, you know, how many parents have I heard, I would change places with my kid immediately if I could. So from the parent's point of view, having to listen to your child's suffering is so painful. And at the same time, you're providing them a strong lifeline. You're providing them a kind of a, you're not alone, you know, you're not alone anymore. And the child's not alone. And it opens up a dialogue, you know, with somebody who's trusted. And, you know, and then that might then open up the idea of going to a school counselor or going to a therapist or something like that. Mhm.
And you know, that point about you are not alone, which is the name of the book, it's helpful for parents to keep that in mind, especially as they're going through the pain of hearing about their child's pain. And sometimes you want to just immediately lean out of that moment and provide immediate reassurance, or to say, no, you don't want to do that. No, 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 no. But it's really just about being present with your kid in that moment. As hard as it is to hear that, they need you to hear that so that you all can work towards taking the next appropriate steps. And to that point, say if your kid does disclose to you that they've injured themselves, or
Mhm.
you've caught them
Mhm.
in the middle of it, how could one actually respond in that moment? Because it's one thing when a kid is like, "I'm thinking about this," but
Right.
when you actually see it,
Yeah.
what's a way for parents to respond in the actual moment?
Well, so the first thing is I mean, to the extent that you can, you have to stop everything. You know, your child is in tremendous distress. And it's and really, really listen. One of the things that a lot of the kids say is that my parents just don't understand me. They don't understand what I'm going through. And um, and it's hard to understand the level of pain that requires self-injury to, you know, to improve. The other thing that kids will say is they'll say, you know, that parents go into this wanting to fix the problem immediately. And it's hard to fix a problem that you don't actually understand. So that if you say, you know, if a kid says, you know, I broke up with this person and I just feel so alone and I'm thinking of suicide, I say, wow, when I was your age, I broke up with 16 people. I never tried to kill myself. That never helps, because what you're doing is you're taking the focus out of that person's experience onto what you did. You're a different biological being, you're a different psychological being, you're a different developmental being. And so what you want to do is you want to say, that just sounds so awful. Like, that sounds so painful. Like, can you just tell me about what is going on for you? You know, now, of course, when you first hear those statements or first um, uh, uh, see that behavior, it's going to be really hard, and it's okay. Some parents feel that they have to be very stoic and to say, you know, this is really, it does scare me. It does scare me to see you suffering so much, and I'm terrified of losing you. So be honest about your feelings, because parents often want to pretend that it's okay. To a highly sensitive child, they're going to see the distress in their parents. And if the parent says, oh, I'm okay, that's going to be dissonant from what they're experiencing from their parents. So just be honest about your feelings. But you can also say, look, I've gone through some difficult things. I can manage my stuff, but I want to be able to help you with what's going on. One other thing, though, that as you asked the question, I thought about, when a parent hears that their child is suicidal or self-injuring, I've seen many parents immediately start blaming themselves. And it's imagine that your child has diabetes or asthma or cancer or stomach problems. It's, you know, that the brain is going to work in the way that the brain does. It's not, there might be some things that you're doing that aren't that helpful, but blaming yourself doesn't help your child. And it's often not that you said, okay, you know what, I've got three wonderful children. I want one with mental health issues. So I'm going to maltreat them and see what happens, see if they develop a disorder. No one does that. You wake up with compassion and you want to help your kids. And sometimes kids will struggle. So blaming yourself, if you want to blame yourself, do it once and then get over it. Now you've got to help your kid.
And
Yeah.
in addition to parents blaming themselves, and I'm so happy you touched upon that because that comes up time and time again in these conversations. But then it's also concerning to the parents because they're like, well, how do I act and behave around my kid after this happened? After
Mhm.
they attempted suicide, after they harmed themselves? How do I interact with my kid? Because you
Mhm.
imagine some folks can be just helicopter parenting on top of their kids. So, what advice do you have for parents for
Mhm.
what to do in the aftermath while giving your kid a sense of independence, autonomy, but also wanting to keep them safe?
Yeah. So these are important observations. I had a kid who's now an ICU nurse, and her mom one day said, "Are you? Do you ever still self-injure?" And she said, "Mom, that was 10 years ago." So to continue to ask the question might be too much, especially when that behavior has gone down. In the immediate aftermath of the behavior. I think that you have to create a plan, and the plan has to do how are we going to address this behavior? Now, there's the how are we going to address this behavior from a mental health point of view with therapists, with maybe psychiatry, etc., and understanding that, it's really difficult at times to find mental health experts. But at the same time, the family can be its own protective unit. Who are the people, the friends, the religious people, the neighbors who can be part of a healing team. In the meantime, are there people at school? Are there teachers and stuff like that you just say, look, in the same way as if your child had a seizure disorder and they were going off to school, or they had diabetes and they were going off to school, you'd want some people, some personnel there to know about that so that if something happens, that they can be there in the same way if your kid is struggling this way. So not to carry this alone, that there ought to be some shared people that you can talk about, and that you can say, look, I don't know enough about self-injury. I'm very worried about this behavior. I want you to be able to talk. I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to listen to what's going on, and at the same time, we're going to be looking for more resources to help you with this, and then be educated because it's not that the child lives in isolation; they're living with the parents. So you also want to be educated about what's going on for the kid as well. So.
Mhm. And that part about assembling a team around you is so key because as a parent, it would be easy to keep this to yourself, just keep it within the family and not wanting other people to know. But other folks should know because you really want to wrap your kid around with the supports that they need from multiple people. And that touches upon a whole chapter in the book talking about assembling the team, thinking about who are other people that are a part of your community who could be instrumental in your kids' mental health journey. It can't just be on your shoulders, and we can't just rely solely on medication management or solely on one form of therapy. We really have to be holistic in our approach. Yeah.
It's interesting because I was working, I gave a lecture in Chicago, and this was to teachers. And there were some teachers from a private school who were saying, oh, that we have this resource and this resource and this resource. And then there were some teachers who teach in South Side of Chicago who are, where the buses are armored and there are needles all over the place. And no one has the kind of wealth and resources that these other, that the wealthier folk had. And, they said, we don't have any of that. We don't have the yoga studios and the massage. But you know what we have? We have neighbors, we have ministers, we have priests, we have extended family members. And, uh, and that's the most healing that you can do. And sometimes I think that we get so distracted that you want the expert, you want the trauma yoga person or whatever it is, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But connection heals, comparison doesn't. And kids too often are comparing themselves, which is why they're feeling so isolated. But connection heals, and there's always people who love that child, and in under most circumstances. And those are people who don't want a penny for their time. They're
Yeah.
actually willing to bring in a meal and so on. And so they're there. And it's sort of like, but you also have to pay attention, like, who are my people, because when you as a parent are feeling um so traumatized by what you've seen, you'll start doing what the kid does, which is withdraw, which is to not leave your house, which is like to be hypervigilant and all that thing. But that's what the child was doing that scared you in the first place. So you have to also model, wait a second, like, this is really worrisome, and who else can we bring in?
That modeling piece is so important, but also parents really should feel empowered that they already possess a skill set that will aid in the kids' healing, will aid in the kids' recovery. And I think oftentimes we're looking elsewhere. We're looking to the medical model to heal our kids. But there are so many things that parents have, families have, communities have access to that are not medical treatments or interventions, but are truly powerful and impactful. And thinking about interventions, what are some preventative measures? What are some tools and strategies that we can start teaching our kids, incorporating into the lives of our kids, into our interactions with our kids that can make it such that they have more effective coping strategies than, say, this coping strategy of engaging in self-harm?
Well, one thing is that I learned was in the work that I did was I saw, and what the kids would tell me was how, if they did wonderfully, their parents were so proud of them. If they engaged in some of these negative behaviors, their parents were very, very critical. And one of the things I did with my own children is I said, you can tell me literally anything. And what I'm going to do is I will be disappointed at times. But I'm not going to, it's not like, okay, you're banished to Siberia for the next 10 years until you fix yourself up. So the first thing is remember, you were an adolescent too, and you're worried about your kids, which is completely understandable, but be compassionate, even when they're doing really silly things. Even when they're doing so, maybe engaging in sexual relationships, maybe they're engaging in drug experimenting relationships. Be open, be that parent who's not going to be harsh, critical, because why would a child want to share with their parents if all that's going to happen is criticism, judgment, and everything? So be open. They're much more likely to engage with you if they do. The other thing is whether it's prayer that you practice, whether it's mindfulness that you practice, one thing I would do is, can we just, pay attention to right here and now. And the way I got my kids off social media, because I thought social media was anti-social media, was I just said, here's what I want you to do. One of my kids had a gluten intolerance. I said, how do you know you can't eat gluten? He said, because I feel sick. I said, okay, I want you to do this with social media. When you're on this platform, how do you feel? I actually feel pretty good. Okay. What about this platform? Nah, there's so much comparison. People are bullying others. How do you feel about yourself after that? Not that good. Okay, pay attention to that. So I didn't judge it one way or another. I said, I want you, but in order to do that, you have to be mindful. You have to be able to pay attention. So I really encourage my kids to practice. And we would do like fun little activities like, okay, everybody focus on something green in the room, or focus on the taste of the rice today. So just little exercises in paying attention, so that they would be more trained in this idea of paying attention. And then, if you want to expand to broader mindfulness, that's fine. So those are two things. And then the other thing is just like truly open listening. You're going to have, differences of opinion with your kids. And you can even share that you have a difference of opinion, but it's sort of like, tell me more about that thing that that I might disagree with. So so I think that those are the main elements.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's why I really appreciated our interview way back when, because we just completely align in terms of how we think about the importance that parents and caregivers play in the mental health of our kids, and basic, simple things that we take for granted, like noticing how we're feeling, noticing things in our kids. It's just so critical, especially because parents and everyone, we're just so busy, and that it's hard for us sometimes to notice what we're going through internally, and sometimes notice some of the distress signals that are coming from our kids. But if we could practice that each and every day, just how to notice little things, that really trains the kid, like you said, to start to do that on their own. And then they're trained to notice subtle changes in themselves and be curious about what's behind that. You know, one of the things about Ask the Expert is that we could go on and on and on, because I have a ton of questions for you as the expert here. But what I know is that we have 335 people who are logged on, 335 people who signed back on, which is amazing. And so
Mm.
that really
Love
just,
you all. Love you all.
yeah, it goes to show just how interested people are in on this topic. And so we've received a lot of questions so far, and I encourage people on the call to continue to send your questions. But a question that came up that I also wonder about is that there can be a cycle in which people are engaged in self-harm behaviors, and then they go to the hospital. They engage in the self-harm behavior again, they go back to the hospital. Suicidal thought attempt in the hospital. So, what are your thoughts about how to break that cycle of behavior and intensive level of care, inpatient level of care?
You know, people, I often hear somebody who people say things like, oh, I have this habit or I have this tendency. Now, a habit or a tendency is something that is not in your conscious awareness. The second you say, I have a habit or a tendency, it's not a habit or a tendency anymore. It's a choice, because you've moved from something that you're unaware of to something that you're suddenly aware of. Now, when you see repeated patterns, if every single time I drive out of my driveway, I get a flat tire, well, there's a pattern. Okay, if it happens once, it's not a pattern. If it happens once every 3 years, it's not a pattern. If it's happening regularly, it's a pattern. Now, what you have to do is you have to break down the elements of what that is. And you have to break them down in the here and now. Let's just say that in the hospital, the kid does not self-injure, and then they leave and they're self-injuring. Okay, what's going on in the hospital that they're not self-injuring? You could say, well, they're locked up and all their stuff is taken away. Maybe that's one of the reasons. But maybe when they're going back to school, there's a level of distress. Maybe there's a level of relationship problem. Maybe there's stuff going on at home. And that is leading them to have a level of emotional dysregulation, meaning inability to control very strong emotions, that they then resort back to that behavior. And so the way that I do it is I actually sit down with the kid and I say, look, this cycle has happened 4 times. You self-injured, you went to the hospital, they discharged you, you went back home. And then I want to know, what were the things that were implemented to try to help that child? And often it's, maybe a little bit of medication here, maybe talk to this person there, which often does not help because it's not addressing whatever's going on. So what you want to get down is you want to really understand the context under which that behavior is happening. Is it happening every day? Is it happening at night? Is it happening during the school months, but not during the summer? Is it happening during the weekdays, but not on weekends? You want to know what the pattern is. You want to see if there are common elements. It's like, when my dad's away all week, but then he comes back on the weekend, he makes me so stressed out. Who are the people involved? What are the elements? What are the emotions involved? Really trying to understand what it is that they're trying to solve. By breaking down that pattern, then you're going to be able to see. And if you think about this, you watch a football game on TV, and something isn't working for the football team. So then you get the coaches drawing all the different plays and saying, this is what we were doing before. That wasn't working. Now we're going to try something else. And it's the same thing. So you're going to break down that pattern and you're going to say, okay, this is this pattern. Let's start changing some of the elements in this pattern. So the important thing is to really deeply understand this pattern.
And to break it down, to understand what is happening, take a step back and problem solve around it. Don't just continue with the same elements in place. Feel
Exactly.
empowered to make the changes in real time,
100%. And actually, one of the things that I've done with families is, and I tell all my therapists, to be a therapist, you have to have a whiteboard. And the reason, and you can do this as a parent as well, is when you're seeing this and you're saying, hey, look, here's the pattern that I'm seeing. Parents and kids will often say, wow, that's actually true. I've never seen it done in that way. And sometimes they'll say, oh, well, because, this is what you did to me years ago and da da da. And I say, okay, but look, this is what the pattern is that's happening right now. Let them see it and just say, okay, it's, before every test, with a certain teacher, who knows what it is? This is the pattern. Okay, let's see if we can, if this is our hypothesis, we've created a hypothesis. Let's see if we change some of the elements of that pattern. It's like, Mom, I'm trying to talk to you every single day. You are so exhausted by the time you come home. I'm feeling so alone and I self-injure. Maybe that's the pattern. And again, often there's not like any evil intention. People are always trying the best that they can. But then it's sort of like, okay, how are we going to change the elements to this pattern?
Yeah, that visual is so important
Mhm.
for kids to see. Another question that came through is, and it's a good question in terms of, if someone engages in superficial cutting or has a desire to engage in cutting frequently, does that automatically mean that they are more prone to developing borderline personality disorder? Or does it mean they're more likely to develop mental health conditions? It's really just about, does self-injury, self-harm equal borderline personality, and kind of how to understand that diagnosis.
Yeah, so I would probably say uh, if you scratch yourself deeply because you've been bitten by a mosquito, you don't have borderline personality disorder, even if you're like self-soothing, most of us would do that. And so if it's providing some sort of sense of relief for the kid, they might not then have relationship issues. They might be doing well in their life. They might not be angry all the time. They might have a good sense of who they are and stuff like that. So some researchers will say that it is one of the most common signs in people with borderline, in adolescents and teens with borderline personality disorder. And at the same time, so I'd have an index of suspicion. What that means is it would be something that I would be thinking about, but it wouldn't be the thing that I would automatically jump to, because I think, there are other people who, I mean, I actually met with this kid the other day, not the patient's sibling, who said, oh, I heard from a friend that if you cut, like, you feel better. I tried cutting a few times. It didn't do anything. It actually hurt quite a bit. So the kids can also sometimes be experimenting. But having said that, if they're self-injuring, it is something that I'd start to worry about. But I wouldn't just automatically say you're now going to develop borderline personality disorder.
Yes, because there's a whole other kind of list of things that we would
Criteria. Mhm,
typically see.
mhm.
One of the things that's challenging about having a child engaged in some of these behaviors, we touched upon this a little bit earlier, is allowing them to have the autonomy, the independence, but wanting to keep them safe. But the scariest time for a lot of parents is when their kid transitions into adulthood and they're 18. So any advice around how best to navigate that transition when your kid turns 18 in terms of parental
Yeah,
involvement and medical decision
yeah,
making, therapy, providers, any
yeah.
advice you can offer?
Yes, the time and the intervention to do is when the child is 12. You see, I think that what happens is, one of the things I told my kids, okay, like, you guys have to learn how to do the laundry. And like, a lot of their friends would say, oh, ha, ha, you're doing your laundry, like, it's ridiculous. Or I said, you have to learn how to make your school lunch. You have to learn how to cook some food, like one meal a week or whatever it is. The preparation for that transition time is when they're 12, not when they're 18. It's sort of like, okay, you're 18, here, go drive a car. No, there's a preparation time and then you do it. So so whatever you're doing now is what's going to influence a kid 6 years from now. So because you want that pattern of behavior to be there. Now, what you could say, my kid wasn't prepared, and all of a sudden they've turned 18, and now they're saying, I'm an adult, I can do whatever I want. One of the things I did, I told a parent to do, is stop paying the kids' bills. And they did, and they said, I said, well, how's being an adult now, you know? And by the way, you know, kind of developmental adulthood is probably around 25 anyway. You know, 18 is just this arbitrary number. But kids will say, I'm an adult. I said, fine, pay your rent, buy your food, pay your phone bill. You know, it's not easy. You think it's hard being a kid. It's not that easy being an adult either. So you know, but I think the preparation should start as young as the child is developmentally ready for. Because what you're doing when they're 12, 13, 14 is you're preparing them for 18.
Oh, I love that. I know we tend to get into
Yeah.
the preparation mindset a little bit too late, but the idea of starting at 12, I think it's important because we don't talk about that.
Little things, and it does,
Yeah.
again, it's just little things
Mhm.
that you build on. You know,
Yeah.
I've had parents get their kids into Harvard, but the child doesn't know how to do anything else other than study. And these kids aren't that happy. They don't know what else to do because they haven't got the life skills, the social skills. You know,
Yeah.
what's it, home ed, you know, that they used to do,
Yeah.
should
Home
be
ec.
mandatory. Home ec, yeah,
Yeah.
should be like, I mean, you can know, I could ask you, what's Pythagoras' theorem? You might be able to quote it. I say, can you balance your checkbook? Uh, can you manage your money? You know, why aren't we, you know, those are skills that kids need to know, you know, so.
They're critical skills and tools because then the kid feels more empowered when they're out there
Totally.
on the world. And actually, you're
Mhm.
helping to build resiliency too, because if they're challenged with kind of these basic things on how to navigate the world, that can have a negative impact on their mental health when they're struggling
100%.
to make sense of all of that.
Mhm.
One other question that I have for you, because you talked about the importance of talking to other people in your kids' community about your kids' mental health. But not a lot of people, not everyone was able to attend this amazing fireside chat to learn about self-harm and all that. So as a parent, how do you communicate or talk to other people about what your kid is going through in terms of using self-harm as a coping strategy or suicidal thoughts? How do you talk to other people when you want their support for their kid? Because not everyone understands that. What should a parent
Mhm.
say when they want other people to understand what their kid is going through?
Yeah, well, one thing is, and I mean, I've seen it in my own life, you know, with my own kids, is that, you know, one of the things I paid attention to was who were the parent kids, who were the parents uh, who were parenting in a way that was resonant with what I was doing, you know, and who were the ones who weren't. And then I would just listen, like, okay, this parent is worried about their kids in this kind of way. They're much more likely to listen to me than somebody who says, you know, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and then, you know, just go along. That person might not be. So I think, I mean, we often get advice from people whose lives we don't want to live, from a critical parent or something like that. So never get advice from those people, because if they were following their own advice, they'd be happy. Follow the advice of the people that you see are content. So like, you know, so I would go to people who are like, wow, they seem to be getting it right. And just say, it's like, hey, listen, I'm struggling. I see you're getting it right. Go to a minister, go to a, you know, counselor. So it's just I want to see models of the kind of person and kind of parent I want to be, and then ask them how they do it, you know.
Wow. Well, I asked a bunch of questions. This amazing audience asked a ton of questions. And I just want to thank you so much for this conversation. And not only for the conversation, but allowing me to better understand how to structure these important chapters within the book. Really, our conversation was so vital to understanding what content to put in there, how to structure it. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
You know, Christine, what there's, you know, I think every parent I know on the planet has the book What to Expect When You're Expecting. Probably one of the best-selling books. Not a single parent has what to expect the day they come out of the womb.
Yeah.
And because the world is so complicated and the world is so different. And I think in the book that you've tried to put together is you try to, it is the, it is the equivalent of what to expect once they're out of the womb.
It
So
is, and that was the inspiration for it because I bought that book while I was
yeah,
trying to figure out how to expect, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start.
exactly.
I felt
Yeah,
alone in having all these questions, but
yeah.
so nice to have such a comprehensive guide about that. And so that's what this book is. And I just want to flag for others that you have a book that will be coming out early next year. I Hate Myself. That's right.
Mhm. Yeah.
Overcome self-loathing and realize why you're wrong about you. Wow, what a powerful title.
Interesting. Nelson Mandela said one of the most beautiful things ever. He said, no one is ever born hating another person because of the color of their skin. If you hate, it's because you've been taught to hate. And the antidote to hatred is love. And so if you can learn to hate, you can learn to love. And I think the same thing applies. No child is born hating themselves. And if they've learned to hate themselves, it's because they've been taught to hate themselves. And and if they've been taught to hate themselves, they can learn to love themselves. But they have to be in environments where it can slowly erode. Simply telling a child that you love them doesn't get them to, it's like telling a child, you know, don't have diabetes. It's like, well, don't tell me that. You have to learn how to manage with those things and how to break away from that. So it is my big mission for the coming year because I've just seen how tragic this is. I think we're seeing increasing suicide rates, sadly, in teens, and so many are so dissatisfied. But Chris, awesome. You're just like a wonderful interviewer. So if you have a second job as a TV kind of like a talk show host.
Hey,
So
we'll see what happens. But thank you for that
exactly.
feedback. Thank you for that feedback. And I love that
Yeah.
we're both wearing the color purple. I
There
appreciate
we go. There we
it. Yes,
go.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you everyone for joining this conversation today. And as Dr. Ken Duckworth mentioned earlier on at the beginning of our session, we do have two books from NAMI. You Are Not Alone, that focused on Dr. Ken Duckworth's 130 interviews talking about the mental health journey of adults. And this book, You Are Not Alone for Parents and Caregivers, available in bookstores at Barnes and Nobles. You can purchase copies at Amazon as well. And so I really encourage you all to look into these books. All of the money that comes from the sales of these books goes straight back to NAMI so that we could continue to provide such excellent programming across the country. I'm also wanting to thank our sponsors for allowing Ask the Expert to happen. We are so grateful to our sponsors that you see on this slide. There's a lot of work that goes into putting on this production, and so we're really grateful for our supporters. There are a few dates that we want to make sure that you put on your calendars. November 21st, we have another Ask the Expert around talking about cognitive training with Dr. Susan McGurk. And then also make sure to put on your calendars December 12th. Cognitive remediation. So really interesting topics. We really hope that you guys will be able to attend those sessions. Make sure you reach out to us here at NAMI. Here's our contact information, as well as more information about Dr. Aguirre's new book, I Hate Myself. You see the website right there. And you have my email address here too, if you want to reach out with any questions that you have. I know that folks have feelings about social media, but it can be a powerful tool when used correctly and when used appropriately. So make sure to follow me on Instagram at Dr. Christine Crawford, as well as on LinkedIn, where you can learn more about the books and other things. So make sure that everyone here knows that you are not alone. You are not alone, and NAMI is here to support. And so we encourage you all to think about ways in which you can continue to support us here at NAMI. So consider donating to NAMI if you like this program, as well as other programs that we have. And you could go to nami.org/donate. So once again, thank you everyone for attending, and a special thank you to Dr. Aguirre. Thank you so much, everyone.
Christine, can just one bit, I know you have to leave in a second, but I see that there were a ton of questions in the chat. What I was wondering is, because these are people who logged on who wanted to have these questions answered, I'd be willing if somebody at NAMI could collate those questions, if there's a way to actually download them in any way, put them all together. I'd be happy to spend some time answering those questions and sending the answers back to NAMI. Now, of course, if it's about a very, very specific clinical situation, I cannot answer that. Like, my child's on too much Prozac, what should I do? But I think that there's some general questions. So I don't know if those can be captured, but I'd like, to be able to offer some support to the people who asked questions that didn't get them answered.
We have a whole list of questions, and we will send you that list. And that was the list I was actually using to post these
Great.
questions to you. So
Brilliant.
thank you so much for offering that. And for everyone who logged on and who registered, we have their emails. And so we can find a way to send that out to everyone who registered for today's webinar. And thank you so much for that, because you're right, lots of questions, and we had such a robust conversation. So really appreciate you offering to answer those unanswered questions. So thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.